Welcome. Come explore ancient Egypt with me. We're about to uncover secrets that only the ancient stones can reveal. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you get notified whenever I post new videos, and thank you so much for supporting the channel. The Great Pyramid of Giza is always a favorite topic. That's because there are still so many unanswered questions about its design. Some of these design quirks are deeply significant, while others are just plain strange. In this video, we're going to focus on a really interesting part of the pyramid that most people tend to overlook. The layout of the Great Pyramid is pretty well known. The entrance opens onto a descending passage that cuts into the bedrock, leading to an unfinished underground chamber. A short distance down, the ceiling opens up, now sealed by 3 massive granite blocks, and reveals an ascending passage. Past those blocks, the passage leads to what's known as the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, and the King's Chamber. Most visitors rush through the ascending passage as quickly as possible because it doesn't look all that impressive. But actually, the ascending passage is one of the most mysterious parts of the entire pyramid, thanks to its strange and unique construction. The first key point is that this passage has the most damaged limestone in the whole pyramid. Sure, tourism over the past few hundred years has taken a toll, but records show the damage goes way back. For instance, Prospero Alpini in 1591 and Benoit de Maillet in 1692 both wrote that the passage looked rounded and heavily worn, even back then. Looking at it today, it's almost impossible to see the joints between the blocks in the floor, walls, and ceiling. That's why we have to rely on old records to understand how it was built. Thankfully, brothers John and Morton Edgar put in the time and effort to draw detailed diagrams of the blocks and joints in the ascending passage for their 1910 book Great Pyramid Passages, Volume 1. A quick side note. The Edgars approach the pyramid from a mystical and theological point of view, so they fall into the alternative history camp. But that doesn't mean their measurements and observations aren't accurate. In fact, many of the best records of the pyramid over the last 400 years were made by people lovingly called obsessives. Anyone who devotes serious time to studying and documenting evidence deserves to be heard, even if their conclusions seem a bit far-fetched. For the record, I'm not taking sides in any Egyptology or ancient history debates. Anyone who's passionate and dedicated is welcome in this space. What matters is studying all perspectives with evidence. Back to the ascending passage. Since the original structure is so worn, we mostly rely on the Edgars' work to understand its design. Other researchers, like Flinders Petrie, also describe the passage in less detail, but their descriptions match up closely with the Edgars' drawings, so we can be pretty confident in their accuracy. One of the most unique features of the ascending passage is what's called the girdle stones. Unlike the rest of the pyramid, where separate blocks make up the floor, walls, and ceiling, these girdle stones are single solid blocks that were hollowed out to form the tunnel. Some parts of the passage use partial girdle stones where the upper walls and ceiling come from one block, and the floor and lower wall sections come from another. And as if that weren't complicated enough, the full girdle stones are aligned vertically with the base of the pyramid, while the surrounding masonry is aligned with the angle of the ascending passage. That's not all. The bottom part of the ascending passage is even more confusing. The stones here are in the worst condition, and it seems like more girdle stones were used in a less organized layout. These lower girdle stones are also vertical relative to the base, while the stones above follow the slope of the passage. Lastly, under each of the 3 upper girdle stones, the Edgars noted what they called scored lines on the walls, markings that seem to guide or mark where the girdle stones were placed. It's a lot to take in, but let's break it down, one idea at a time. The most obvious purpose of the girdle stones is to add structural strength to the ascending passage, so there wouldn't be any cracks or sliding between the blocks, which could affect the stability. The huge granite plugs that now block the passage had to be slid into place, and that may have caused, or been caused by, movement between the joints. Preventing the granite plugs from slipping properly was one of the goals. Another purpose of the girdle stones might have been to help anchor the ascending passage to the surrounding internal structure of the pyramid, to avoid too much stress building up where it intersects with the descending passage. That sounds like a straightforward explanation, but there are issues. First off, why don't any of the other pyramids have girdle stones? The passages in the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid are actually longer and more vulnerable to stress, but there are no girdle stones or vertically aligned blocks in them at all. The lower girdle stones in the Great Pyramid's ascending passage have sparked a lot of debate among Egyptologists, especially because of their irregular placement. That randomness raises the question. Was the ascending passage an afterthought? A late design change? Because the lower girdle stones are in such poor condition, it's hard to even tell if they were part of the original pyramid structure. One idea is that the passage was carved later, extending a few meters upward as a modification to the original design. But if you compare the stonework around the lower girdle stones with the so-called robber's tunnel, you'll notice the joints are completely different. That makes it more likely that the girdle stones were intentionally placed and the passage was carved through them from the start. There's also the issue of the limestone used in the ascending passage. Unlike the other rooms and corridors in the pyramid, this passage wasn't built with the high-quality Tura limestone that once formed the pyramid's outer casing. A study conducted by Hani Halal at Cairo University, along with professors Hassan Imam and Taha Abdallah, looked at the hardness of the limestone used inside the Great Pyramid. Their results showed that high-quality limestone was used almost everywhere, except in the ascending passage. There, the limestone was average at best and, honestly, very inconsistent. This poor-quality limestone could be another sign that the ascending passage was a change in the original plan. Even the unfinished subterranean chamber might support the idea that the original design didn't include the ascending passage at all. Architect Jean-Pierre Dormion, in his 2004 book The Room of Khufu, suggested that the upper girdle stones were originally meant to function like crossbeams, similar to what's seen in the bent pyramid at Dashur. But I find this theory hard to believe, because Old Kingdom pyramids only used those kinds of beams on flat surfaces, and the builders of the bent pyramid had no problem leaving one of them unused without trying to repurpose it. More importantly, it's clear the ascending passage was meant to hold the granite plugs from the beginning, because the bottom of the passage gradually narrows to stop the plugs. That's not the kind of design feature you just throw in later, it had to be planned. Now, while the Edgar brothers were able to give nearly every single measurement of the Great Pyramid a spiritual meaning, even they were initially stumped by the upper girdle stones. All they noted was that the stones were spaced exactly 10 cubits apart, with the topmost one located 20 cubits before the end of the passage. One thing I can't help but notice: the design of the passage seems to evolve from randomly placed lower girdle stones to neatly spaced and well-aligned upper ones. That suggests the builders gradually improved their technique and got better at reinforcing the passage more efficiently as they went. Even the scored lines near the top look simpler than those at the bottom. My guess, those marks help the builders align or secure the girdle stones in place. But if any of you watching this work in construction, feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments. One of the main reasons I started this channel is to involve the community in piecing together these mysteries collaboratively. It might sound ironic that one of the most overbuilt sections of the Great Pyramid, the ascending passage, used the lowest quality stone, but maybe that's not a coincidence. When we look at the completed Great Pyramid still standing today, it's easy to assume the ancient Egyptians built it perfectly according to plan, but of course problems were bound to come up, and the builders would have had to adapt with whatever tools and materials they had on hand. I can't even begin to imagine the logistical nightmare of managing a supply chain for something this massive 4,500 years ago. Let's say for whatever reason, they ran out of high-quality Tura limestone while working on the ascending passage. Maybe plans changed, or maybe the Nile didn't flood enough that year to float the stones to the valley port. They wouldn't have just stopped building the whole pyramid, they would have found a workaround. The over-engineering of the ascending passage using girdle stones could be a direct response to that stone shortage. They didn't trust the lower-quality limestone to be strong or precise enough, so they just hollowed out giant blocks to make up for it. As their skills working with this material improved, they were able to return to a more traditional building style as they went higher. This isn't the kind of story you expect when studying the Great Pyramid, but not every odd feature leads to some big revelation. The Edgar brothers put an enormous amount of time and effort into documenting the design of the ascending passage, but even they couldn't come up with a solid explanation for the girdle stones, and that's coming from men who saw spiritual meaning in almost every measurement inside the pyramid. Later on, Morton Edgar did try to assign some deeper significance to the upper girdle stones, maybe just so he wouldn't leave anything out of his spiritual framework. One of the key lessons when studying these monuments is, don't overthink it. The simpler your explanation, the more likely it's right. It's easy to get carried away imagining the endless mysteries hidden in 2 million stone blocks. But if we want to get closer to the truth and make sense of the odd features in the pyramid's construction, we'd do well to remember that even the Edgars didn't start out thinking every oddity had some deep meaning. We should all just do the best we can with the resources we have, and that includes the builders of the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. Thanks so much for watching this video all the way to the end. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and don't forget to like or comment with your